take a seat. We're going to get started, and I wanted to just thank you so much for coming on this kind of dreary day, working your way through the Santa Claus Parade if you're coming from anywhere but close by. And this event, as you know, is Burial Through a Jewish Lens. This has been organized by myself, Ellen Passmore, Lori Rotenberg, who you'll meet in a couple minutes, and Karen Robbins, who's back in the Zoom booth. And very excitingly, we don't know how many people have actually showed up on Zoom, but we had 50 registered on Zoom. So it's a very good turnout, even if just a high percentage show up. So I will go through the agenda in a couple minutes, but this event, I just want to say, is an event of the DJC Social Justice Committee. And I'm going to introduce Lori Rotenberg, who will do the land acknowledgement.
As we gather here today, it is important to acknowledge that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited for thousands of years by First Nations peoples prior to the advent of colonialism. In particular, we appreciate and thank the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for their stewardship of this land on which we live, work, and play. As settlers, we must recognize, reflect on, and take responsibility for our contribution to the colonial oppression and genocide of First Nations people who continue today to suffer from racism and unjust treatment. We must make a collective commitment to ensure that the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation is made a reality in our communities. It is imperative that we support and seek justice for the original inhabitants of this land.
So I wanted to just do a quick review of the agenda so you know what to expect for the afternoon. We are going to start with Rabbi Glickman, our spiritual leader from DJC, who will be giving some opening greetings. She will be followed by Jeff Krymalowski, who will be speaking about the Beit Olam Cemetery, which is the DJC interfaith cemetery, in terms of the history and the current status of the cemetery. Following that, Lori Rotenberg will be presenting remarks from Howard Mammon, who's the executive director of the Toronto Hebrew Memorial Park. He was not able to be here with us today, but he sent remarks for us to deliver on his behalf. Following Lori, Susan Greer, who's the executive director of the Natural Burial Association, will be presenting on natural burial and some other alternatives to more traditional burial practices. Following Susan, Rabbi Glickman will then discuss the halachic implications of burial and post-death practices, as well as her position and her willingness to do various types of funeral services. Since we have a really packed agenda, and we're of course starting late, which is no great surprise since it's a Jewish event, but I wanted to ask you if you would please hold your questions for the three speakers until after the break, and the three speakers will be available for Q's and A's. So that's the rundown of the day, and I'm going to turn it over to our Rabbi Glickman to do some opening remarks.
Thanks, Ellen. Good afternoon, those joining in person, those joining through Zoom. Rather than thinking of it as two gatherings, let us energetically imagine that we are all in one giant room together. Ellen is absolutely right. Talking about what happens after we die, what happens after our friends and family die, is really scary and can be uncomfortable and can be highly emotional. And yet it's very important to talk about it because we can do hard things, and we can do hard things together in a safe space that we are creating both in the Zoom room and here in this physical room together. Some of what we'll hear might have an ick factor. We just have to acknowledge that. Some of what we're going to hear this afternoon might trigger us, whether that's because it reminds us of the Holocaust, or it even just triggers and touches us because we bring to our minds and hearts friends and family, dear loved ones who have died recently or even many, many years ago. And so I welcome all of us, again, here in person, joining via Zoom, to come at this panel, this discussion this afternoon with open curiosity and acknowledge where sometimes, or there might be something that might push you a little, and it's okay to take a breather, take your own bio break, even before the bio break that we have put into the schedule. And of course, after the fact, not just today, I am available to help anyone process this, whether that's a pastoral counseling session, a spiritual counseling session. So with that in mind, and the safe space created, and knowing that this, for many of us, if not all of us, might be a difficult conversation, we begin.
Before I bring Jeff up, I just want to acknowledge that Rabbi Glickman has been incredibly enthusiastic, supportive, and engaged with the organizing committee on this event, and she's been with us through the whole thing and very participatory and extremely helpful. And it's been, as a newer member, it's been really impressive to me. So I just wanted to thank Rabbi Glickman for her support on this event all the way through, which has been in the works since June, if you can believe it. Anyway, so thank you again. And I want to call up Jeff Krymalowski, and he is a longtime member of the DJC, and he was a member of the Ritual and Practice Committee, and which is the committee that helped locate the interfaith cemetery, Beit Olam, and he's going to give us some information on the cemetery.
Yeah, so the DJC, like all Jewish communities, wanted to fulfill one of the primary obligations that a Jewish community has whenever they come to a new place. Find a cemetery. And the rabbi informed me, form a Chevra Kadisha, and the third thing, a mikveh. Well, you know, we're the DJC, so the cemetery was enough. And so in, next slide, please. So in 2007, 2008, and it might have started in 2006, and Marley, who's here, was involved, the DJC started to investigate various options to find an interfaith burial space that would work for our community. They did a lot of work, and in the end, could not come to a successful resolution. Next slide. So in 2012, Rabbi Miriam came to the Ritual and Practice Committee, of which I was a member and 4 or 5 others, to see what we could do at that point, whether standards had changed or the cemeteries had changed, to allow an interfaith burial space. So we contacted all of the Jewish cemeteries in Toronto, all of them. Either they didn't return our calls, or they told us, we said, you know, any space for interfaith? None. We're not going to do that. Will you ever do that? Probably not. So then we looked into who else had cemeteries in the GTA, and the largest was the Mount Pleasant Group, who have a bunch of cemeteries through the GTA. And we started to talk to them about where we could find space that we could consecrate to our standards to have a cemetery. We visited Mount Pleasant, which was, you know, lovely, but way out of our price range. We visited another cemetery in Pickering, and then we visited York Cemetery at Yonge and Shepherd. All of those had, well, Mount Pleasant didn't, but 2 others did, and it, not to get in the weeds, the best place we found was the one in Pickering, and there, next slide, please. Yeah, so the Mount Pleasant group agreed that we could go ahead with an interfaith space in one of these cemeteries, and this one in Pickering in particular, if we found 50 DJC members. We could set it up as a separate space, we could delineate it with shrubs or with fence, and we could put a DJC emblem or Magen David. And and we engaged with Benjamin's and with Steele's Memorial. Would they take people there? Would they prepare them for burial there? They were happy to do it. Again, we stuck with this one in Pickering, which gave us, a reasonably costed option to work with. Next slide, please. We worked with the rabbi to come up with some burial standards that we would work on, that it would be, our cemetery would be for DJC members only. Cremation would be allowed, but after a ceremony, after a Jewish funeral, we could do what we want with the body, and then the rabbi would not officiate at the burial of cremains, but those cremains could go into our cemetery. No non-Jewish symbols on the monuments, and no non-Jewish ceremonies graveside, a Jewish cemetery. A community meeting was held, and again, we were after 50 people to commit to this so we could go ahead, and there was some interest, but not nearly 50. And so we left it and did not proceed further. Next slide, please. Then in 2017, Rabbi Miriam was informed that Arba Memorial, another cemetery and funeral chapel company operating in the GTA, was going to open a Jewish burial space called Mount Zion Garden at Highland Hills in Stouffville. So me and I forget who drove up there the day of a solar eclipse. I remember that. So there was a lot of looking down, which would be used, which is in use and was used by Orenu Humanistic and other Jewish groups in the GTA. We checked it out and we found it's a lovely space, but there were other groups around, and there were many large crosses right where they wanted to put us. So we didn't feel that comfortable with it. Next slide, please. And then Rabbi Miriam was informed that Holy Blossom and some other progressive congregations were working also with Arbor to find a space at Glenview Memorial, which would only have flat gravestones and no large Gentile symbols, in view. And we visited the site, and with the rabbi from Holy Blossom and from some other congregations, and then we decided to join there. There was no minimum commitment for members. Any members that wanted to could sign up and get space, and so yes, we have, I think, 10 people that have signed up to be at Beit Olam now, and it's a going concern. Next slide. And there it is. It's at the north end of this space, which is near Pearson Airport. Yeah. And next slide. And there is the pricing as of a few weeks ago. It's available for $5,000 for the space, plus the prices up there for memorial tombstones and the price for opening the grave for interment. And I've got those prices if anyone's interested. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. So I wanted to just introduce Lori it's a good segue because Howard Mammon, who's the executive director of TMHP, Toronto Hebrew Memorial Park, THMP, has been very engaged with us in this discussion. And Laurie will share some of his remarks regarding their interest in separating out a part of the cemetery as a natural burial site.
Toronto Hebrew Memorial Parks operates Pardes Shalom and Pardes Hayam cemeteries. For those in attendance who don't know, the two cemeteries are very large parcels of land, and both are very active cemeteries. Together, they interred approximately 900 Jewish people who died over the last year. I am pleased to know that your community has come together today to discuss end-of-life issues. In my opinion, making advanced arrangements for your funeral and burial should be part of your estate planning, just like your will and powers of attorney. If you make such pre-arrangements and let your loved ones know about the arrangements, you are providing your survivors with a huge gift. They will know what you want, and you will have paid for it all in advance. I can't remember how many calls that I have received over the years where families didn't know if their loved one who is dying or had just died had burial plots at any cemetery. They don't know how they will pay for the required funeral and burial services.
We will be back to finish Howard's remarks because the rest of the remarks relate to natural burial. So we want to present them after the presentation on natural or green burial. So I'm honored to introduce right now Susan Greer, who's the, as I said before, is the Executive Director of the Natural Burial Association, and she's going to be discussing natural burial plus a few other non-traditional methods of disposing of bodies with us. Thank you, Susan.
Hello, everybody. I'm very honored to be here today. I have neighbors who know how envious I am of your organization, so it's this is the only way I get in here, yay. Okay, so yes, I'm here to talk about natural burial. Ding, slide change, please. I'll tell you what it is. I'll answer some of the most common questions about it. I'm going to tell you why people like it and what's happening around Ontario. And then DJC did ask, because you don't have time to have somebody to talk about alkaline hydrolysis, someone to talk about NOR, and I do know about these things while it's not something I do on a day-to-day basis, I'm very comfortable talking about these, so I'll go over those alternatives as well. Ding! FYI, just so you know the background on Natural Burial Association, aka NBA, is we're 100% volunteer. I'm a volunteer. I just heard about natural burial on CBC in 2018, and it just made a lot of sense, and things snowballed from there. So we spread awareness of what this is and help the local advocacy groups that are pitching a natural burial ground in their community. And then we knocked down some incredible barriers that we have in Ontario, and I wish I had time to tell you about them, but I don't. Lastly, we, touch wood, look to have perhaps found some land for a dedicated natural burial ground outside of the GTA. Ding, next slide, please. So what is natural burial? Natural burial is what formerly used to be called burial. Below the ground, the body is buried in a biodegradable casket or shroud. The grave depth is about 3.5 to 4 feet. That's where all the rich microbial activity is. So your body is giving as much as it possibly can back to the earth. Of course, there's no embalming and there's no vault. And above ground is what makes it exciting, and how in the vernacular natural burials come to really imply this. And the land is restored and protected in its natural ecohabitat. There's no rows of tombstones, no mowing, no pesticides. The markers are either very modest flat markers, or there's a communal marker like a list on a boulder, or GPS. Legally, every cemetery has to be able to tell you where your loved one is, so you can find your loved one via GPS. But they look like meadows, they look like forests, they look like crown land, absolutely natural, no roads going through. This isn't new, right? It's been going on for millennium. Since there have been people, there has been natural burial. It's the only way in which we can care for our dead that is not a process. It's natural. And I feel silly saying that today in this particular audience because, of course, it's still practiced today by many faiths, including your own. I'm going to tell you why people like natural burial, because it came as a surprise to me. I went at this with an eco angle, but that's not even the number one reason why people like it. They love the idea that they're giving back to nature, that it's consistent with their faith or their traditions. They like the idea that there's a final resting place in nature, that's where they're going to be for eternity, and that's where their friends and family will be coming to visit them. They get that this is part of the cycle of life. Without death, we won't have life. They're leaving a legacy, because when you buy that plot in a natural burial ground, it's like donating to Nature Conservancy of Canada. You're protecting that nature in perpetuity. But the word that we hear more than any other is reciprocity. The earth is given to us through life, and it's a way of giving back. I'm just going to read, we get literally thousands of fan mail, very lovely reasons why each individual likes natural burial. I'll just read this one. I don't even have words for how meaningful and deep it is for me. It's a connection and a responsibility to the earth. There's humility and love in it. It would be my last commitment to our climate. I've read that hundreds of times and I still get shivers up my spine. So in order to convince the government and the industry that this isn't just some trend, we hired Angus Reid, very notable pollster, Canadian pollster, and surveyed people around Ontario. And I could show you slides about how every age group loves it, how every income group loves it, how every education level loves it, every geography in Ontario loves it. But this is my fave, that conservatives, NDP, and liberals, and all love natural burial. So it's an idea that really resonates, and you can't stereotype and think that it's only us tree huggers that are into it. It's not true at all. Next. So there are, of course, tons of questions about natural burial, and I'll be happy to answer any of them later. But the top ones are, does your body poison the water? Of course, you would know that because there's Jewish cemeteries today which are not playing havoc with the water system. No, it doesn't. The diseases die when we do, with rare examples like Ebola or the mad cow disease that humans get. I can't pronounce the name. So there's no worries in that regard. And of course, there's tons of legislation about where you could have a burial at any rate. Scavengers are not interested in our body. We're buried way deeper than the smell line is too much work for them. So there's no instances with all of the burials in the United States and the UK, the natural burials, of which there are hundreds. There's no worries about scavengers. Next. And so this is going to segue into, I'll answer the last question that we get all the time about natural burial, but it also segues into the part that I was asked to do, talking about the alternatives to natural burial. Is cremation eco-friendly? I'll start by talking through an environmental lens. No, yes, it is a lot more friendly than the modern conventional burial that has been commercialized largely in the Christian faith, with the hardwood caskets and the vaults and then the embalming and all of those bells and whistles. So yes, compared to that, it is eco-friendly, but no, it takes the equivalent about 2 tanks of an SUV driving to Montreal from Toronto, and then the burning of the body puts so many toxins into the environment. And not only toxins, but although if they do have a filter, some of the toxins are stopped, but the carbon, there's a release of carbon there into the atmosphere. And also what's often referred to as the cremains, which are not ashes, they are the pulverized bones, are too sweet for the soil and also too salty. So apparently lots of people like to leave their ashes at Jane Austen's garden, and it's ruined her whole garden because the cremains are not healthy at all for the soil. But I want to be fair and say some nice things about cremation, that logistically it's easier because when you are being buried, you have to be buried more quickly. With cremation, you can cremate the body, and then it gives time for the family to come back. It is probably, always depends on circumstances, the least expensive option as a way of taking care of your dad. And it allows you to have your loved one in places like the cottage or where have you, where you can't do that as a burial. Next. So alkaline hydrolysis, which is also known as water cremation, and the branded name, like the Kleenex of tissue, is aquamation. And in that process, well, I should say that it's just become legal in Ontario in the last couple of years. And the body is disrobed and it's placed into that stainless steel chamber. You can see the picture there, with water, lots of water, and potassium hydroxide. The water is raised to a very, very, very high temperature, and the body is agitated. And after several hours, I believe it's like 12, 15 hours, the corpse ends as I'm just going to read this because it ends as a green, brown liquid and bone, and the effluent is discharged as wastewater, and the bones are pulverized, just as I mentioned, with flame cremation. Looking at it through an environmental lens, it does use a lot of water, arguably not a problem in Ontario, but it does use significantly less carbon, which is great. And there's another option, ding. This isn't available in Ontario yet. It's officially called natural organic reduction, but you've probably heard it referred to as human composting. It is legalized in at least 9 American states. And I get wind that there are some funeral homes, funeral directors that are looking into bringing this to Ontario. It's really captured the interest of the Americans by storm. So the body is put into a chamber, and in that chamber, which is sealed tight, is alfalfa and wood chips, the body's microbes and nitrogen and carbon, and that generates so much heat, and there's moisture in there. And so it mimics the natural process of composting like we do in a natural burial, only that much more quickly. It takes about 12 weeks. I hear various things on there too. At a certain point, midway through, they do open up the vessel and take out the bones and pulverize them and put them back. So at the end of this process, you have a cubic yard of soil. I've read that it could be between 500 pounds or 1,000 pounds. So quite a bit of soil, rich organic soil, which can be taken to your garden, or I think that in the future there will be like arrangements with land trusts and that kind of thing. But it's something to keep on the horizon. It's not available now in Ontario. So there's 2 types of natural burial grounds: hybrids and dedicated natural burial grounds. The hybrids are those which are attached to the conventional cemeteries, the manicured tombstone cemeteries. There are some very, very beautiful ones, like Willow's Rest in Niagara Falls is 2 acres. They have school groups come in and plant wildflower plugs. They have pollinator gardens. They have apiaries. It's truly done with so much TLC. It's a lovely thing. Picton is Ontario's only forested cemetery. The day that I was visiting there was a deer staring at us. Like, it's stunningly beautiful. And Union Cemetery, while only a quarter of an acre, has a conservation land behind it. So it really, you feel like you're at one with nature. And they have the father and son team who runs it. They pull out invasive species by hand. They dig the graves by hand. It's really, those are some examples of some lovely, lovely hybrids. And of course, there's some greenwash out there as well. I want to talk a minute, if I can, about Toronto Hebrew Memorial Park, because I went with Shoresh. Do you know Shoresh? That's a Jewish organization in Toronto that combines your faith and nature. And we went and had a tour with Howard, who is the loveliest guy in the world. And I think people attracted to the cemetery business, Howard accepted, are really risk adverse. So we saw the cemetery, which was like the row of tombstone cemetery, and then there was like just this little moundy, hilly thing off the side. And Howard and his assistant were like, yeah, we think that's where we'll like start just to test the waters, where the natural burial ground is. And all of us are looking at each other like, I wouldn't make the trip for that. And we didn't tell Howard. But then later he took us on the tour of this whole property, and they have 200 acres. We go along past that silly hill, and then suddenly, like, it was all of us together collectively, we take this gasp. There was this wetland, like this little boggy wetland area. It was so beautiful. And then when we went further, took a turn and went further along, and there was nice gentle hills, and it would be so, so beautiful as a natural burial ground. So my plug today, and maybe Lori will reinforce that when she comes back up, is let Howard know if you're interested in this, because that's what that board doesn't have, that comfort. It's a scary thing to commit this. They have to have separate bylaws for a natural burial ground. You can't just like kind of willy-nilly go back and forth. So they need to know that there's a commitment. So flood his phone line next week, and let Howard know that if you are interested in this, because it's truly beautiful, and it will be the envy of all of us goys. Yeah. The other kind of natural burial ground is a dedicated natural burial ground. And the Angus Reid poll did say that this is what the majority of people would prefer, because it's not attached to any conventional cemetery. They're all over the US and the UK. They're not started by people in the conventional businesses. It's a different kind of person that starts this natural burial ground. Tons of TLC. What you're seeing here is the only public natural burial ground in all of Canada. No surprise, it's in BC on Salt Spring Island. And Kathy and Gavin there have an 84-acre farm, and in the back of it, it's Douglas fir forest. It's just stunningly beautiful, and people are just absolutely loving it, and it will protect that beautiful ecosystem forever. So our organization is actually actively looking for land, and I don't want to jinx it, but we think we found something north of the GTA. So, we don't know whether we can, with such early days, but would there be a Jewish section? Maybe. We just don't know what will entail, but that's the hope, that we can embrace everybody. And I'm not going to go through this list. The best thing is just to visit our website, naturalburialassociation.ca, and you can see all the various hybrids across the province if they're of interest to you. And DJC also asked that I touch upon costs, which is really very hard to do because every cemetery sets different rates. But there's two rates that are involved, and Jeff can contradict me if it's not the same at your cemetery. But there's the plot price, and that's the price that Jeff gave you. And then there's the opening closing fee, the fee of actually burying you in there. And so for natural burial, because they're in the more rural areas, they are relatively less expensive. Glenwood is $1,300 with the $200 for the opening closing fee. In Coburg, it looks to be almost double that. And so again, you have to make those phone calls. You have to do your research. Legally, every cemetery has to post their prices on their website. Not that they all do, but, and then alkaline hydrolysis is really more or less in line with that, cremation a little less expensive, but it depends. Just so you know that, when you're thinking about it, the law is very, very clear in Ontario, and the organizations that take care of the body is the funeral home or the family, nobody else, not the cemetery. People think that when they found their natural burial ground, they can work directly with the cemetery, and legally they can't. So you do have the funeral home provides that service of the care and transfer of the body, the documentation, perhaps the obituary, any services are gathering, anything along those lines. Looking at your decisions through a financial lens, and I know there's two funeral homes that are the Jewish funeral homes, but just generally speaking, the funeral homes that are not bricks and mortar funeral homes are a lot less expensive. You would Google basic funeral home or simple funeral home, and you'll find something a lot less expensive. Not that I'm condoning that, I'm just giving well-rounded information. Next slide. Yes, just, I think this is my last slide, to let you know you don't need to use a funeral home, that you can take care of the body on your own. It might be harder than that would appear, and so it is worth investigating in advance. You can supply your own casket. If we have any carpenters out here, you can make your own casket, you can make your own shroud. You have to run it by the cemetery and the funeral home beforehand. They want to know that it's safe, and the dignified word that they use a lot. But you can do that, and it can be very meaningful, needless to say. You can, should you opt for cremation, scatter ashes on Crown land, many public parks, lakes, and just became legal in Ontario for those who want to be buried with the pet. You can, if it's a cemetery that has a pet area, you can be buried with your pet in that special area. The pet, unfortunately, has to be cremated. I think that's it. Yeah, thank you. That was fast. I hope I covered everything.
As a segue, back to Lori, Susan did mention that she has had quite a lot of contact with Howard Mammon, and Lori's going to present the balance of his remarks, which relate to the issue of natural burial.
Okay, again, I'm speaking as Howard. I am pleased to let you all know that Toronto Hebrew Memorial Parks has joined the discussion about natural burial and has reached out to the Natural Burial Association for information and support. In fact, earlier this year, Susan Greer presented a compelling case for natural burial to our board of directors. Since then, we have done further research into the issue and have spoken to and visited with cemetery operators that have green or natural burial sections in their larger traditional cemeteries. More work has to be done on our end, and we are engaging land planners to determine the best possible scenario for us. The TMHP board is carefully considering the natural burial option as a long-term sustainable solution and looking at possible natural burial locations at Pardes Chaim Cemetery. We believe that natural burial will be attractive for those Jews who might otherwise think twice about burial. We also believe that most people would look favorably at natural burial if asked about it and if they had a choice. Our board has yet to decide on the matter, but all that we have seen thus far has been positive. We would like to know if natural burial is something that you want our organization to embrace. So you can email us at info@tmhp.ca. I'm going to say that again, info@tmhp.ca, to let us know how you feel. Howard is really anxious to hear, not anxious, but excited to hear what kind of response we have. So there will be an opportunity to talk about this later in the small breakout groups. We have committed the organizing committee for today's event to get back to Howard and let him know what level of interest there is at the DJC.
So I'd like to introduce again Rabbi Glickman, who's going to be talking about, I'm sure I have many questions, I'm sure you all do, about what does all this mean in terms of being a Jew and being buried in a traditional way. What does halachic law say about all these new burial and body disposal methods that we've been talking about today? So I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Glickman.
Well, so far I've learned a lot. How about you? I'm so grateful to Jeff and Susan for bringing their expertise and their know-how, and I'm taking notes. So I am going to be talking about the Jewish perspective on all of this, and then conclude, as was mentioned earlier, what I will do as the Danforth Jewish Circle's rabbi regarding all of these burial and post-death options. I want to start by saying that the Jewish value or principle that is being explored here this afternoon is kavod hamet, honoring the dead. In Jewish law, everything that leads up to the person dying, up until and including burial, is all about kavod hamet, honoring the dead. If you've ever been to a Jewish funeral, there is a particular moment where it almost instantly shifts, and all the energy and focus is on the mourner. And here's the moment. So we're at the cemetery. We have finished putting the dirt respectfully, right, and covering our loved ones. And then the funeral ends by having everyone going into two parallel lines. And as the immediate mourners walk through the lines, we, as the community of supporters and loving friends and family, say, Hamakom yenachem etchem betoch sha'ar avalei Tzion Yerushalayim, which means, may you be comforted with all the mourners in Zion, you the mourners. That is the moment. And so everything that leads up to and including burial is exclusively, almost exclusively, about how we honor the dead. Next slide. So I want to take a look at some foundational texts to help frame our understanding. They both come from the book of Bereshit, Genesis, the first book of Torah. The first is about creation. We're in chapter 1. When God created human beings in the divine image, and the Hebrew is B'Tselmo B'Tselem Elohim. We, each one of us, is created in the divine image. In the image of the divine, we're all of us created. So that's a foundational text, that each one of us has divinity inside of us, and that our very essence is as if the divine image. And the second also comes from the book of Genesis. Vayar Elohim et kol asher asa v'hinei tov me'od. And the divine one, on at the end of the sixth day, when everything was created, every shrub, every flower, the expansiveness of sky and ground, and human beings, what did God say? This is very good. So the very creation of human beings is an act of goodness. Okay, those are some good foundational texts to remember. I want to go, next slide. Thank you. I want to go through 3 values and using Jewish texts to help us. Now, there are many, many more texts that I could be offering today. Scores of legal codes, legal texts, conversations. Distilling it to just these few is very, very challenging. So just know this is really just a précis of what our tradition has to say about bodies and burial and death. So these 2 texts are exemplifying the value that what we're doing is when our bodies die, we are returning to the earth. The human being is part of the earth. The first text, we're still in Genesis chapter 2. Adonai, God, formed the human being, the Adam, from the dust of the earth and blew the air, and that's where our neshama, our souls, come from, and that Adam, this human being, became a living being. So we come from earth. And the second text from Genesis chapter 3, this is post-Garden of Eden, eating of the fruit and the punishment that comes to Adam and Eve and the snake. God says, by the sweat of your brow shall you get bread to eat. This is talking to the first man, Adam, until you return from the ground, for from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So these 2 texts are foundational to teach us that the human being, our very bodies, are part of the earth. We come from it. And so too, we are enjoined to return to it. Next slide. We're now fast forwarding to the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, the last book of Torah. This is very interesting. It's a teachable moment here about what we are supposed to do with a dead body. So if a man, a human being, we could take away the gender here, dies, we're not going to get into the reason why a person is impaled at the stake, but that is a thing that happened. But here's the teaching. You must not let the corpse remain out in the open overnight. You must bury the body the very same day. Why? It's not what the divine one wants. So we already see, even back thousands of years ago in biblical times, that people died in all sorts of interesting and gruesome ways. But the teaching here is that the body must be buried almost immediately. And that, of course, speaks to our Jewish tradition where, by and large, we do bury as soon as possible. In the modern era, there are exceptions to the rule. If close family members need to travel by plane, car, boat, however, because someone lives abroad, we will postpone. But we take this teaching from Deuteronomy as saying it goes back into the ground, and we have an honoring of the body itself by burying it as soon as possible. Next slide. Value number two. Value number two is about being with our families and somehow having a memorial to be remembered. So this is from the Jerusalem Talmud in a section called Moed Katan. There's this teaching that teaches us that there's something called a secondary burial. So Rabbi Meir is teaching us here, and he says a person can collect their parents' bones because it is an occasion of joy. In earlier times, they were burying people in ditches, and when the flesh has rotted away, they'll collect them and bury them in cedar wood. On the day itself, he was mourning, and the day after, he was happy, implying that his parents were at rest from judgment. So what's happening here is that once upon a time, there was a practice for Jews to be buried in shallow graves or in ditches, and that the flesh, it would take about a year, the flesh would naturally rot away. And then the bones would be collected and buried either underground or in a cave. There's actually examples of like a family bone box in our tradition where all of a family's bones would be put together. And so, since we've already heard Susan's presentation about some of these alternative models that exist in the modern era, this is really human composting, we could say, right? The body dies, time has naturally allowed the flesh to go away in the way that it does. And what we are left with is the bones. And this is saying that then we take those bones and we bury them in a different place. The second text on this slide is also from Jerusalem Talmud, the same section. It's saying that you can excavate the bones. Let's go to the second sentence. It is permitted to transfer one to lie in one's own property. This is a value in our tradition that is saying that it is highly regarded to be buried with one's kin, with one's family. And I think that people really want to be memorialized. They want a place that either has a marker or something that says, I am here, broadly, I was here, and that friends and family can come and visit. And so these two texts are speaking to the idea that we can take bones and we can bury our loved ones in places where we actually know where they are, and we can have them with our loved ones. Next slide, and our final value. Very interesting. We are not permitted in our tradition to derive economic or practical benefit from dead bodies. The Mishnah Torah was written by Moses Maimonides. He writes, a human corpse is forbidden to be used for economic or practical benefit. However, hair is not literally part of the body and is permitted to use for benefit. And you'll note there, just below it, it says that later on in the Shulchan Aruch, they reject that lenient view. So actually, hair is included. And the Mishnah Torah text ends, likewise, the coffin and shrouds are forbidden to be used for benefit. What Moses Maimonides is saying, this is a 12th century physician, rabbi, philosopher, he is saying that everything and anything is not permitted once a body has died and is buried. We cannot then use anything for another benefit. We cannot take the shrouds. We can't build something with the bones. We can't repurpose the coffin, right? All of that has a sanctity to it. And we honor, again, kavod hamet, we honor the dead by not using them for any economic or practical benefit. Moshe Isserles in the Shulchan Aruch, a little bit later on, he extends it to say, one should not even take the earth from the grave and use it for benefit. And why? Again, kavod hametim. This rule is for the sake of honoring the dead. And so when our loved ones and we die, everything that is buried with it is as is. We don't then unearth things for any other benefit, except from that previous text we looked at, you could theoretically find the bones that are left and bury them in another place, but not taking them and selling them or making a necklace out of them, for example. Just as an example. All right, next slide. So those are the three overarching values that I wanted to talk about today. So what does Judaism, what does Jewish law, halakha, have to say about all of these things that we have already started talking about today? And if we remember, our guiding principle and value is kavod hamet, how we honor the dead. All right, the first is the body burial. As Susan said, this is green. The way that we bury Jewish people is kind of getting lots of check marks in the environmental world because we use a simple pine box. There's no metal used. There's no embalming in Jewish funerals. And the body is dressed in simple shrouds. All of these things will just decompose as the body will. I should say, you might know this, that this body burial, meaning the funerals that we have been to, no doubt, is and has been the Jewish norm for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it is considered, quote, best practice in Judaism. And why is that? Because of the texts that we just looked at in these past few minutes and lots of other texts, that our bodies came from the ground, they go to the ground, etc. Regarding cremation, regarding the next three, there's an issue in halakha, in Jewish law, about speeding up or slowing down the natural process of the decomposition of the body. Is that interfering? Is that getting in the way of something? And there's discussions, as you can imagine, over hundreds of years now about what that means. Is that an implication Jewishly? As I mentioned in my opening remarks, flame cremation is very much at the heart for so many people of thinking about the Shoah, the Holocaust. As a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, that hits me, and it might as well for you. So that's not necessarily a logistical or financial decision. It is kind of a kishka decision of like, there were 6 million who did not obviously make that choice and were murdered. And what does that mean in a contemporary Jewish society to make that choice? It is very frowned upon, I would say, across the board Jewishly, if not forbidden in some communities. And as we heard before, there are environmental concerns. Shoresh, which we heard before, is Toronto's Jewish environmental organization. There are dozens of Jewish environmental organizations all around the world. And so it is not anathema or unique or unheard of that Jews are asking questions about the environment. Not just, is this Jewishly kosher, but is it environmentally kosher? And so we've heard and we know that cremation is not so kind to the environment. Alkaline hydrolysis, otherwise known as water cremation, we did hear a little bit about that what happens is through the process, the soft tissue is literally washed down a drain and the bone residue is powdered into ash and can be treated like cremains. This is an absolutely fascinating discussion. This process, Jewishly, is neither approved or denied across the board. There are rabbis, the writings that I've researched and looked into is writings in the Reform movement, in the Reconstructionist movement, and the Conservative movement, and we don't have time to go into the specifics. I'm happy to share those articles after the fact, where people are weighing in and saying, this falls under those three values that we just looked at before, and others saying it actually doesn't. And so, welcome to Two Jews, Three Opinions. So maybe because it's newer technology, and maybe just because that's how people see newer technologies through ancient Jewish teachings and values, is that the Jewish community, or I'd say the rabbinic community writ large, is not weighing one side or another. It is an active discussion. And depending on your community, that could be an individual rabbi saying, I will do it, or it could be a larger movement saying, I won't do it, or vice versa. Finally, as we heard, it's not available here, maybe yet, natural organic reduction. This really pushes against number 3, the value that we looked at before about not using bones or any pieces for any advantage. Because on the one hand, we could say, oh my gosh, how beautiful. Our bodies could plant flowers and trees, and that will make the world a more beautiful place. And on the other hand, we have this teaching that says, but we're not supposed to use even the earth where our bodies have decomposed for any other purpose. So again, rabbinically across the board, we don't have a yay or nay. Again, this is an active thing. It is a new creation. So we are literally in the kind of the beginnings or even in the midst of what will the Jewish community do. Last slide. I'm sure you're all very eager to know. So what do I have to say about all of this? 2 major things. One is that my job as a rabbi and as the DJC's rabbi is to balance Judaism with contemporary choices, and I'll say a third with your individual desires, right? That's the challenge and the opportunity and the messy middle of living a progressive Jewish life and being a progressive, liberal Jewish community, as we don't just say, nope, and we close the door on that, right? You may come to me and say, well, I'm interested in X or Y when I die, and my job is to help frame it Jewishly and holding both, say like, okay, this is a value to you as a human being, as a Jewish person. How can both exist at the same time? And the second thing is that across the board, with all of the ways that we could handle our bodies post-death, what I will only do is a chevra kadisha, preparation of the body. I'll talk about what that means, plus funeral, and then whatever happens after. Jeff mentioned this a little bit in his presentation. So what happens in Judaism is when somebody dies, instantly, we do not leave the body alone. Again, why? Kavod hamet, the respect for the body. And when we reach out to our funeral homes, in this case, a Jewish funeral home, they send over a shomer, a shomeret, someone who literally guards the body, reciting psalms, and protects the body from anything and everything, and also just to keep it company all the way until it is buried. It goes to a Jewish funeral home, and then there's a group of volunteers, the most sacred human beings you could possibly imagine, doing very challenging, important work. They're called a Chevra Kadisha, and they, with care and love and following the practices of our tradition, prepare our bodies for burial. They do that by gently washing the body, by removing any jewelry, by putting the shrouds on, and then the funeral itself, which I would officiate at. So for any of these options, that's what we would do. The Chevra Kadisha would take care to prepare the body. With the body, we would do a funeral. And then what you do after that, that's the discussion, and that's your choice. So for example, with body burial, here's what I will do. I will officiate, and I think you know this, and I have, at Jewish funerals inside our own cemetery, which we've learned about, and also any of the Jewish cemeteries around Toronto. If you are being buried in a non-Jewish cemetery, two things, which we heard about a little bit before in Jeff's piece. If you're a Jewish person being buried in a non-Jewish cemetery, you are partnered with someone not Jewish. That's a decision your family has made. I will do a Jewish service at the cemetery. If you're the non-Jewish person who has journeyed alongside us at the DJC and you are being buried in a non-Jewish cemetery, I will do either a secular or Jewish, some of the beautiful poetry and elements that can be kind of more expansive for folks who are not Jewish. But as we heard before, the tombstone and any elements of the funeral would not have any other faith traditions in it, no iconography on the headstone itself, no other psalms or prayers that have another religion's presence. For flame cremation, again, the funeral happens with a body, then what you do with it with whatever company comes and picks up the body would do the cremation itself. Then the family picks up the cremains, and I have done a ceremony, a Jewish ceremony, to bury the cremains. So that is available to you. With water cremation, I mean, it's new to me. I am just learning about it right now. I'll say, as I started off this afternoon, high ick factor for me. The idea of our flesh kind of running down the drain. I don't know what I don't know what to say about it right now, except I don't know what to say about it. If you were to explore it and we have a conversation, the cremains, as we heard from Susan, again, would be buried in a cemetery, like a sort of a more classic cremation. But that's a discussion that we will talk about. And then finally, the human composting. Again, I'm not sure how I feel about it because it seems to kind of go counter to that third principle of using any part of the body, bones included, for financial or any kind of other purpose, including planting a flower and growing a garden, that kind of thing. I think I made it, didn't I? I made it. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Obviously, if you have questions, we have the cards around. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Glickman, and for your honesty, openness, and for all the research I know you've done, because so much of this is still in process. So I wanted to move us to the next stage, which is, if you could please put your questions written on the index cards on this table, the sign-in table, that would be great. And we want to make sure we address as many questions as we can.
So the good news is we had tons and tons of questions. The bad news is we will not be able to cover all of them, but we're making a commitment to the ones that we can't cover. That will be available in follow-up. And there were some duplications, so we will try and go through this speedily. Okay, this is a question for you, Rabbi Glickman.
Yeah.
What does Jewish law have to say about burials, funerals for Jews who commit suicide?
Oh, so we're starting really simple.
It was at the top of the pile.
What a great question. The prevailing understanding is that a human being, a Jewish person, believes in their own divinity, as per that first text that we looked at, believes that their own existence is very good, given that biblical text that we looked at, and must have been suffering greatly when making that decision to take their own life. And whether that's a mental illness or any other reason why a person would go into such depths to make such a difficult decision. And therefore, we do not punish them. We say, you still have a spark of divinity, as every human being does. And it's sort of, to put it crassly, business as usual regarding how we care for the body and honor their life.
Thank you. Second question for you. What is the Jewish view of organ donation?
Oh,
many people
love
ask
this. Great question. I am giving it away by saying that many years ago, my spouse donated a kidney to his mother. So the Jewish view on live organ donation is thumbs up all around, across every Jewish movement. The chief rabbis of Israel, who are Sephardi, Ashkenazi chief rabbis, they are ultra-Orthodox. Everyone across the Jewish spectrum agrees that saving a life, pikuach nefesh, is the highest order of honor, and that if we can donate something like a kidney, which we don't necessarily need to live out the rest of our lives healthily, that we do it, and it's a mitzvah, actually, to do it. And then the same thing goes for upon death. There is no injunction against being an organ donor in Judaism. In fact, again, it is lifted up as a high value, as a mitzvah to do. If you know, God forbid, you were dead in some ways and other body parts were alive and capable in others, the mitzvah of donating various body parts from you does not preclude you from being, again, buried and all the rites and rituals that go along with Jewish funerals.
Thank you. There's two questions for Jeff. Is it possible to take a tour of the DJC cemetery?
Hi there. Absolutely. Ryan, who is our lead with Arba Memorial on Beit Olam, would be happy to meet one of you, a group of you out there, or something more organized. So absolutely.
Okay, and I guess we could provide the information.
Yeah,
Ryan.
for sure. Yeah, I've got his details, and I'll leave them on the table over there, and you folks can just take pictures of that with the pricing.
Great. Do you have photos of Beit Olam?
I should have thought of that. I do. They're 4 years old, and I can figure out a way with Karen to make them available.
For you, Susan, what do you think the prospects are for human composting in Ontario, first of all?
It's gonna happen. It's going state by state in the United States, and it is something that a lot of people want in Ontario. Ontario moves very slowly, and it's also very expensive to get it going. It's not done by the cemeteries, it's done by the funeral homes. So I know there are funeral homes that are looking into it, but it will be several years down the road and lots of bureaucracy in the interim.
Another question for you. Can you compare the pros and cons of natural burial versus human composting?
Well, I'm biased, right? The pro of natural burial, just harping on the comments that we get from all of those people that I touched on earlier, is that it is natural. It's the tradition is giving back to the earth. There's no process. It's done by Mother Nature. It's the only option that is not a process. And there's that additional bonus, if you will, that you're leaving the legacy of nature, that you are protecting that plot, and that plot that's part of a greater meadow or forest for future generations. So there's a legacy in that regard. Nor is has some advantages in that you can take those remains of the loved one and put them where it's meaningful to you. So that could be the cottage, it could be a garden, or for those that don't have that, there are special, in the United States, there are special parks that will accept those human remains. So there's advantages there. And a lot of them, I didn't have time to touch on all the rituals that are involved in all of these options, but people are going, while that body is decomposing, they're leaving pictures on top. If Joe liked a beer, they're coming by and leaving him a Carlsberg Light. Like, they come and go, and it really helps in the grief process that they are seeing him through to the soil. So there's a lot of meaning that is being attached to this, even though it's taking place at an industrial park. They can see through to the spiritual element.
Thank you. Rabbi Glickman, how can we handle arrangements as an interfaith couple?
I don't know if the question is asking arrangements with me or arrangements with a Jewish funeral home. So I cannot, it doesn't mean we won't get the answer, but I cannot speak to the Jewish funeral homes and if they, or I should say more generally, how they prepare a
I'll get this after you.
Okay, how they prepare a non-Jewish body. Would they do the same Chevra Kadisha, rites, Jewish rites before a funeral? So that's that. What was the other way of interpreting that question? Me? Like how I would support?
Well, it was just, how can we handle it? So
Yeah. So I mentioned this before in my remarks, how I would handle Jewish and non-Jewish. So if someone is Jewish, it's a Jewish funeral. And if someone is partnered with someone who is not Jewish, the funeral could have elements of Judaism in it. But certainly if I'm participating or doing the funeral, would not have another religion's pieces in it, because that's not, that's not the clergy person I am. But if you are not Jewish and you are journeying alongside someone who is Jewish, and I've done this before, is I've done officiated at funerals that are wholly secular, bringing in Walt Whitman poems and all sorts of beautiful things like that.
So when we were doing our researches, Steele's Memorial, and this is a few years back, Steele's Memorial would not do anything with non-Jews, but Benjamin's would. They would prepare them for, Benjamin's would prepare non-Jews for burial.
good. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, this is for the rabbi again. In terms of the natural organic Noah, it seems like the gain, quotes, is a byproduct, not intended. So wouldn't that be okay? And isn't motive more important?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the responsa are things that rabbis and rabbinic communities get. This has been post Second Temple, when new things come up that heretofore have not existed in society. Questions come to leading rabbinic folks around the world, and again, looking at context, looking at Jewish tradition, we can then provide an answer. So modern responsa are writing about this very question about, well, is motivation and is intention a part of the decisions that we could make? So in natural organic reduction, the idea is that that already from the very beginning, the intention, I think, I'm so not an expert in this, is that there is something that's going to be done with that, however much.
It's very rich organic soil.
Rich organic soil. There's a lot of information and a lot of writings, a lot of responsa about the ground that we're talking about, earth. Is there a difference between earth and soil? And that's to your question, to this question about intentionality, right? Earth just exists as it is. Soil has an intentionality for something else to come from it. So again, I don't have any more answers except that I continue to learn, and I will share as many articles as I can with everyone who's attended here today, and with the whole congregation, whatever I continue to glean.
Okay, for Susan, in which cemeteries, burial spaces can one be naturally buried with their cremated pet?
I don't know the answer to that off the top, but I do not believe it's, certainly not in natural burial grounds are there pet sections within natural burial grounds. So you would be making a choice to be buried in a conventional cemetery with your pet.
And I'll just say, even though I don't know if this question has come up, there are no Jewish cemeteries that are burying dog cremains with people. It is strictly for humans.
Okay, again, for you, Rabbi, can you currently bury cremations in a Jewish cemetery, human cremation?
Yeah. When I spoke with the beautiful lay organizers, I was trying to remember. I've done one or two in the city over the years, and I just can't remember if it was done at a Jewish cemetery or not. So I don't have the answer for you, but I will look back in my notes and try to discover that answer. So I don't know the answer. Maybe
And
you do,
to
Jeff.
jump in for Beit Olam, the decision was that yes, we would allow cremated remains in the Jewish space.
Is it in a separate section though?
It would be no, the decision was that it would be a full space grave. In some cemeteries, you can get smaller spaces for cremains, but we weren't going to be doing that in our space.
Okay. This is a general question. Are there any plots available at downtown Jewish cemeteries such as Roselawn, Jones, or Pape? The new ones are so far out. Does anyone?
Yeah, so I'll jump in there. In 2012, there was no space, like even St. Clair or any of the ones downtown. Somebody told me though, who just told me, yeah, that the one on Pape, yeah. And who else told me? Mark and, yeah, other people have bought, yeah, that there are a few spaces left on Pape, which I had no idea.
Well, I heard yesterday on Jones too.
Yeah, on Jones, sorry, the one on Jones is the one I'm thinking of.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
like
sounds-
Jones south of Danforth.
Sounds like we'd have to do some more research on that.
Yes,
Okay,
and you've got one.
you're basically saying you have to phone around, you have to do your own research, and you were able to find somewhere. Okay, for the rabbi, what about tattoos on bodies and Jewish burial?
Great question. Tattoos, there is no issue. That is one of those bubamaitzes that we have around, that if you have a tattoo or if you have a piercing, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery, in the same way that like people have an idea about, if people, death by suicide. The idea is like, okay, you made the decision, and that's not going to, again, preclude someone from kavod hamet. The body is cared for in the exact same way by a chevra kadisha, and can be buried in Jewish cemeteries. I cannot speak to non-progressive liberal circles. That this is the world I live in and the world that we all live in. That's what I can speak to.
Okay, thank you all for answering these questions, and thank you for all the questions. And there certainly were ones that weren't answered, and we will try and follow that through. Just before I turn the mic back to Ellen Passmore, I want to extend our gratitude to you because you have been the driving force behind this event. You were the one who conceived of it. Ellen had heard Susan Greer speak and was very keen on natural burial. And I just want to commend you on your enthusiasm, hard work, energy, and commitment. So thank you.
Oh, I want to give my thanks to the DJC staff, Harmony and Joanne, for helping out with this. I want to give a huge thanks to Juliet Palmer, who has been hugely helpful with the technology, and also Karen Robbins, who has been the Zoom mistress. And thank you again to the organizing group, Lori and Karen, and to the volunteers, Evelyn, Rosa, and Marley. And sorry we couldn't use your wonderful facilitation skills. And Kathy Glazier, who had to leave early. We will be providing a recording of this session. And then we will also be putting our heads together to come up with some follow-up questions that have come up, some of the questions we couldn't answer. For example, if the person has chosen to have natural burial in a non-Jewish cemetery. We don't know the answer, but it's a really important question that will follow up, as well as a few others that we couldn't answer right now. Okay, so please informally socialize, schmooze, eat some food, because we're going to have a lot left over. Thank you.